Good day wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of Below the Curve Gaming. It's Martin here, and today we are looking at some painted models from my Ptolemaic Hail Caesar army. So as anyone who knows me can attest, fully painted models are a bit of a rarity in any of my armies. I do love to paint, but due to demands of being one of those alleged grown-up things that we hear about, I don't have quite as much time as I would like. And I have always, to be honest, been far more about the building and playing than necessarily the painting. But with this rarity before us, I felt that I had to commemorate the occasion with a video. So not only will I quickly rattle through the colours used and how I painted the models, give you a clue, it involves a brush, but I will also give a little bit of a history lesson about the Phalangite and the war elephant. So, without further ado, let's dive into it. So, starting with the Phalangite, these are the Warlord Phalangites with the Aventine command group. Now, I apologise, my camera work and lighting is not fantastic. I live in the north of Scotland, it is pitch black outside, and one of the bulbs in my living room has blown very helpfully. But I shall endeavour on, and you'll just have to squint slightly. I promise it makes the models look better. So, the first thing I did on my models was I picked out the skin tones. So this was either in Mournfang Brown by Games Workshop, or Bugman's Glow. Then they were given a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade. The models in Mournfang were then highlighted with either Tusker Fur or Doombull Brown, and the Bugman Glow ones were highlighted with either Deathclaw Brown or Unger Flesh. None of these will give the conventional skin tones that we are used to seeing Games Workshop models have, but then I'm not doing a conventional army. I'm doing an army from the Mediterranean Basin and the north of Africa. I would be the first to admit that my models probably do not resemble individuals from that area. I can only apologise for this. However, to remedy this, I have ordered from Foundry their Northern African set, their Near Eastern set, so the Middle East, and a Mediterranean set of skin paints. Each of these comes with a shade, a layer and a highlight, and I'm hoping that these will, for the rest of my army, result in far more realistic and racially appropriate looking models. I don't really want to bring politics into my videos, but I do feel that given the current climate and what's happening around the world, that we should all try and make a bit of an effort to portray particularly indigenous populations a little more sensitively and accurately. And this is my way of doing that. The armour was done with a base coat of Retributor armour, which is one of the newer Games Workshop golds. This was given quite a heavy wash of Drushi Violet, their shade. I then found I had an old pot of Dwarven Bronze, so I went crazy with the dry brush, and then I dry brushed with Mithril Silver. This gave that sort of beaten bronze look that I was looking for. You can see it on the elephant and on the other Phalangites as well. The armour looks very polished, it looks professional. This is what I was aiming for. I wanted my army to look like the Ptolemaics at the height of their power. Never mind the fact that Ben has taken an army from the Ptolemaics at the very end of their waning empire. But hey, I wanted the army to look nice, I wanted it to look shiny. This was done for legs, it was done for sword hilts, it was done for the pike heads. As you can see in the elephant, it was done all over that as well. The red is very simply corn red with a sort of edge highlight of Wazdaka. The white is Grey Seer, highlighted with White Scar. My White Scar is in an awful state, and due to lockdown I've not really been able to source any more, so I feel I probably could do better in the white. But these are the first models I've properly painted in a long time, So I'm not too fussed at this point, but they will get better as it goes on. The grey on the elephant was done using Mechanicum Standard Grey, followed by a highlight, a sort of layered highlight of Eshin Grey, and then Dawnstone. Dawnstone is actually a really nice colour. I was very pleased with it, and it gave the sort of skin tone I felt I was looking for. The wood was done with Steel Legion Drab, followed by Gorthor Brown. This is kind of in reverse. Steel Legion Drab is paler and brighter than Gorthor Brown, but for those simple leather straps and spear hafts, it wasn't the end of the world. The howdah on the elephant is done using Oak Brown from Army Painter, and then a very simple dry brush of Gorthor Brown as well. It's not highbrow painting. I can paint a lot better than this, and I promise by the end of my armies I will be, but this is me getting back into painting for the first time in a long time. And so I had to start somewhere, I'm afraid. But I am very pleased with the models. I will turn the elephant, if you will excuse the hand and the shadows, so we can see him from the front. I just wanted to get models painted, to be honest, and so like I say, I had to get going somewhere. As I get into the army and I start doing the Ngoni archers, the Amazons, my Numidian peltasts, I'll be able to experiment with different styles using contrast paints. I'll be able to do different shields, and this will allow me to show off, hopefully, a bit more of my painting ability. But now on to what I know you have all been waiting for, which is that wee bit of history. So I thought we'd start with the Phalangite. So, if you remember in my last video, I briefly discussed Thebes. One of the things I failed to mention about Thebes was when the Sacred Band was first introduced, it was not a single military unit, but members of the Sacred Band were spread through the Theban hoplite units to add experienced, skilled fighters who would stand their ground no matter what, which then the other hoplites would take heart from. Something particularly notable about Thebes is that Philip II of Macedonia, Val Kilmer in Alexandria, if you've seen that, was a prisoner, I think there's no two ways about it, of Thebes. He spent his teenage years there. He learned a lot about warfare from Thebes. Thebes revolutionised hoplite warfare. Philip learnt from this. He saw how Thebes were able to overtake several of the other city-states, and when he returned to Macedonia and eventually took power, so very briefly to say, he would have been sort of like a page, a bit like Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, that sort of squire at another house where he is there due to transgressions of the father, as it were. But at the end of it, he returns to his own family. So when he returns, he realises that for Macedonia to become a big player, they need to revolutionise their army. Macedonia's army is consisted of two very distinctive parts. It has 600 of the best horsemen in Greece. They are the best because Macedonia is one of the only flat areas of Greece. It has rolling plains, particularly conducive to breeding and training horses. And as a result, it has natural horsemen. It then has, without doubt, the weakest infantry corps of any Greek army. These predominantly consist of light skirmishers who, whilst they're good in guerrilla warfare fighting against Thrace employs very similar type of troops. They are, however, not particularly good against a hoplite shield wall. Hoplite warfare, as we know, involved lines of heavy infantry pushing against one another. By the sort of 350 BCE period, the spear was becoming longer, the shield was becoming smaller, bronze armour has been replaced by the thorax, which is this sort of heavy linen, layers and layers of cloth armour. Philip realised that he needed to totally revolutionise Macedonia's army in order to be able to compete, as I've said. And so what he did was he created the companions. He created the cavalry and the infantry. These were two very distinctive groups, as you can imagine. He started by hiring mercenaries. He hired mercenaries as officers to teach his men how to fight. That gives you an indication of just how dire the situation was. Then he took the naturally gifted cavalry that he had and he expanded on them, and he expanded and he expanded until it had gone from about 600 to pushing about 3,000-4,000. He changed their war gear, giving them the Zaistos, which is a very long cavalry spear. Not quite a lance in that it doesn't have the butt and the cavalryman doesn't have the stirrups to get the same sort of impact, but it gives them a much greater reach, and it gives the cavalry the potential to be used as shock cavalry rather than effectively a fast-moving ranged unit. He then proceeds to shrink the size of the shield, which goes from the hopalon to the pelte. Pelte is about 18 to 24 inches in diameter. Bear in mind, hopalon is about 3.5 feet across, so it's about half the size. They then developed the Sarissa. The Sarissa is a pike you can see my models armed with. It has a heavy bronze butt, a long bronze head, with a particularly long sort of sheath that goes down over the haft of the spear. This stops the head snapping off. This is important. It's made of strong wood, probably ash, and it's 20 foot long. The regular hoplite spear is 9 foot. This thing is 2 and a bit times the size. So to give you an indication of what 20 foot is, now it was between 16 and 20 foot. So if we just go for a minute with the average being 18 foot. 18 foot is approximately 6 metres. For those of you who are into football, that is 3 of Peter Crouch lying end to end. For those of you, and I know some of you are, who are into wrestling, that is about 3 of The Undertaker lying end to end. For those of you who are crazy and are into that maths that I hear people talk about, it's 6 of those meter stick things lying end to end. It's big, okay? That's the long and short of it. Ash is a strong wood, as is yew. The haft was thick, probably thicker than a conventional spear. And whilst bronze itself is not a particularly strong material, if the wood the spearhead is attached to, and the spearhead is securely attached, you don't need that strong material, because anybody who suddenly slams himself into 20 foot of sharp spike is going to find a terminal case of death coming up. Sometimes halfway up there would be a metal sort of cylinder about 2 foot long. This actually allowed the spear to be taken in half. The spear would be in 2 halves for ease of carrying on the march. You would then slot it into the cylinder and twist it to lock it in place to give you a longer spear. As we said before, hoplite formations tended to be about 6 to 8 deep, whereas a phalanx of pikemen was 16 by 16. The front 5 or 6 ranks would be able to make contact with the enemy with their pikes, reaching past one another. The remaining ranks would angle their pikes going from about 45 through to 90 degrees. At first, this doesn't seem to be particularly important, but what this did was it created a screen that arrows and slingshot could, and would more to the point, be deflected off, which gave the pikemen protection against range and thus somewhat negated the weakness of the small shield. The small shield was important because it was strapped to the arm, not held in the hand. This allowed both hands to be used to manoeuvre the otherwise incredibly unwieldy sarissa or sarissae, while still protecting the user from the front. The pikemen were packed together. They were far closer than any other conventional formation like a Roman legionary formation. An average line of 10 men across would likely be the same rough frontage as 16 pikemen. That's a lot of sharp depth. That is almost 2 sharp spears to every one body. That's not including the ones coming from behind. He changed the helmets as well that the pikemen used, replacing them with, as I've said before, various styles of helmet which had something incredibly important, and that was the ear holes cut out. This allowed them to hear their commands in the battlefield, which, particularly in the pike phalanx, which is incredibly slow moving and unwieldy due to the fact that you're trying to balance 20 foot of pike in front of you, it's particularly important to be able to hear any instruction given to you, especially if that instruction is wheel 90 degrees to the left or right. The linthorax was popular because you're carrying a bronze shield, a bronze helmet, bronze leg guards, and 20 foot of heavy pike. The last thing you need is a large piece of bronze armour strapped to your front and back. Some pikemen, particularly the richer ones, would still wear the bronze armour, but by and large it was replaced with this quilted linen armour. Linen is very important. It absorbs sweat, it keeps away with cool, it's also surprisingly cheap, which is very, very important when you're trying to keep an army going. Pikemen would have officers. Unlike earlier Greek formations, they would have flags so that the soldiers could see where the centre of their unit was. Trumpets were used. Trumpets are particularly clear. They don't sound like anything natural, whereas a drum unfortunately can sound like thunder. Yet again, these are important for that clear, concise delivery of instructions. Pikemen weren't something that had been faced at all. When the Persian army encountered the pikemen, what they encountered was not only long sharp sticks of death, but also incredibly well disciplined troops. The Persian shock heavy scythe chariots had very little effect. The pikemen were able to part ranks. Some of them unfortunately did get mutilated, but compared to the damage that scythe chariots normally inflicted, this was far lessened. The horses were unwilling to charge pike blocks in the first place, which seriously negated the Persian army's usage of medium and sometimes heavy cavalry as well. The pike phalanx could be used to deter elephants, more on that later, and against lightly armoured infantry, which the Persian Empire had, and which actually most Greek infantry was once you got past the gigantic bronze shield. They were absolutely lethal. It was a bit like taking an M16, jokes about that aside, to a knife fight. Alexander and Philip revolutionised warfare. It wasn't just equipment they used, it was also the use of cavalry. Now that will be talked about in a later video, but they used a combined arms force in a way that the city-states of Greece just didn't do. It was a bit like when England invaded Scotland. Scotland didn't have heavy cavalry. It frequently found itself being outdone by the English heavy mail-clad knights with lances. And Scotland obviously used a pike block, but that didn't work all the time. And as the Battle of Falkirk will show, Scotland didn't have the ability to stand up to the heavier armoured English troops. And this was the same as the Persians, the Armenians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Indians who fought Alexander. It's worth considering Alexander never lost a battle in 13 years of, and it wasn't just 13 years, it was 13 years of constant warfare, constant campaigning. He never lost a battle. This was due to his revolutionising his army and the tactics used. the war elephant. When people think of the war elephant, they think of 36 poor beasts trudging across the Alps to surprise the Romans at Cannae and give them the biggest shock the Roman Empire had had. The war elephant, however, was not an invention of Carthage, or rather a tactic of Carthage, in that no one invented an elephant. It came from ancient India. Ancient India had been using war elephants since about 5 to 600 BCE. Thus, the first people to encounter the war elephant in the West was Alexander. Alexander defeated the Indians, but he was impressed by the war elephant. He understood the importance of shock and awe, of terrifying your opponent and winning whilst engaging the enemy as little as possible. Preferably from behind 20 foot of pike normally, but anything that would cause the enemy to break and run and reduce your own casualties was massive. Alexander managed to put together an elephant corps suspected to be somewhere in the region of 200 to 300 war elephants, but died before he ever got to use it in the battlefield. When the Diadochi, or the War of the Successors, occurred, Ptolemy fled to, well, he didn't flee, he went to Egypt. That was his satrap, his governorship. With him, he took his troops. Ptolemy was, as I recall, an infantry commander, so he predominantly had infantry. After the Battle of Gaza against Seleucus, he captured some of the Indian elephants, took them back to Egypt, and founded his own elephant corps. Unfortunately, elephants, like any creature, eventually get old, or in the case of war elephants, die in the battlefield. So Ptolemy was forced to replace them. Seleucus was less than willing to trade elephants with him, and in fact Seleucus was less than willing to give anyone elephants. So Ptolemy founded a city called, I believe, Ptolemaic Theron, which nobody really knows where it is. It's somewhere down at the bottom of the Suez Canal. It wasn't a big city, it was like a massive trading post, and this was where Ptolemy sent his hunters and his best trappers to capture elephants, take them to this city, and then they were ferried up the Nile. Ptolemy put together a corps of African forest elephants. Now, the African forest elephant is smaller than the Indian elephant, which is in turn smaller than the African plains elephant, or the today's African elephant. Incidentally, the today's African elephant has never been used historically as a war elephant. Don't believe anyone tells you that. The downside of the African plains elephant is that in being smaller than the Indian elephant, it was scared of it. Ptolemy discovered this when he marched his new shiny elephant corps to war against Seleucus and found that his elephants wouldn't engage Seleucus's elephants. This led to a bit of a problem. The Ptolemaic Empire did continue to use elephants, but they had to look for inventive ways to defeat their own elephants. And this leads us very neatly to defeat Seleucid war elephants, And this leads us very neatly to how were elephants used. So the Seleucids, being the master of elephant warfare, would line their elephants up at the front and use them to charge the enemy's war elephants. If the enemy's war elephants were smaller and weaker, or there was less of them, and your elephants were able to win, they would then proceed to run amok, generally devastating whatever they could get close to. This was a controlled running amok. It should be noted it's very difficult to manoeuvre an elephant, or to get it to turn. You will see in the front of my elephant, there is a poor chap who has not managed to make it into the howdah. He has what looks like a small boat hook. This is a mahout. The mahout is the elephant handler. He would be the first individual the elephant would be introduced to. He would name the elephant and he would train it. Elephants are incredibly loyal beasts, and there are stories of elephants standing over dead mahouts, carrying injured mahouts to safety, going berserk when the mahout is slain. The mahout's boat hook served a particular purpose. You could try and gore someone with it, but it's not advised. The hook could be used to tear at an elephant's ear, to sort of nick it, in a way that a cavalryman uses spurs to turn the elephant. Elephants, their knees don't bend particularly far. They still bend, they're an animal, but an elephant is not capable of particularly sudden changes of direction. It doesn't accelerate massively fast. The war elephants we were talking about had a top speed of between 15 and 20 miles an hour. So once an elephant gets going, it moves in a straight line. Elephants are one of, if not the animal with the highest sense of self-preservation. Elephants don't want to die. There's a reason they live to be so old. To get an elephant to charge enemies takes a lot of training and a lot of alcohol. Before a battle, an elephant would be given a large draught of strong wine, as would often the crew, and then it would be pointed in the direction of the enemy and charged at them. As people became used to elephants, their use changed slightly. It was less about lining them up in front of the army and a bit more about strategic use. Horses are skittish beasts, as anybody who's ridden a horse can tell you. Horses dislike the smell of camels. They are terrified of the smell of elephants. So the use for elephants began, as cavalry became more popular, to line them up opposite the enemy's cavalry, bundle them forward as fast as they could, chasing away the enemy cavalry. The horses would absolutely lose the plot, throw their riders and just bolt. The cavalry would be trampled, or if they managed to escape, would be a spent force. Bearing in mind that cavalry units are far smaller than their equivalent infantry units. Then the elephants could be eventually redirected to rampage down the flanks of an enemy formation. Cavalry in these days was not deployed in the centre of armies. In fact, even in medieval and Renaissance era warfare with Gothic knights in full plate, cavalry was not really deployed in the centre of the battlefield. It takes up a lot of room. If it dies, you've suddenly got a huge gap you need to fill. If it panics, you have horses running all over the place rather than just down one flank. It's not an ideal situation. Don't believe Braveheart, that's what I'm trying to say. If you could get your elephant then to start crashing down the enemy ranks, you could cause untold carnage. An elephant armoured as this one is would be almost impossible to stop. The huge armoured headpiece, the trunk guard, the frill which protects people behind it, the howdah to protect the troops, the chain mail to deflect arrows. Arrows will catch in chain mail, particularly if they don't come dead at it. The armoured leg plates, this would be the equivalent of a tiger tank bearing down on the flanks of an infantry formation. Some elephant corps would go as far as to break the elephant's tusks and replace them with long sharpened spikes with sword blades sticking out. Bronze, occasionally iron. They could, as we have seen in the Lord of the Rings movies, and this did happen, they could attach chains or flails onto the elephant's tusks, or occasionally trunks. Very barbaric. These animals were put through excessive cruelty. This was in the days before PETA, Greenpeace, etc. Disproportionate, and I would say unnecessary. I mean, it's unnecessary cruelty forcing an animal into war at the best of times, but to turn it into a living engine of destruction in the way that the ancient Indians and particularly Seleucids did take the biscuit somewhat. Elephants could be stopped if you could flank them. You could then throw javelins, try and kill the crew. The quickest way to stop the elephant would generally be to kill the mahout. He often wasn't armoured, and if he was, he wouldn't be wearing armour that would protect him against a lot of range firepower. You could pepper an elephant full of arrows, maddening it, and it would turn to get away from the enemies, crashing into other elephants and its own lines. The Romans would set fire to pigs. They would slather them in tar or grease or honey, of olive oil, I believe, set fire to them, and the agonised screams of the pigs terrified the elephants, who would then flee. You could try slamming war engine shot into them, it wasn't very accurate. But they were not invincible, but they were devastating, in much the same way that a battle tank is. By no means invincible, particularly if outflanked by infantry, but in the right theatre, an unstoppable beast of war. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Any comments, please feel free to share them below. Feel free to like the video, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It does really help the channel. We have a blog. The link should be in the description below as well. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of the day, whatever you're doing.